Hi, everybody. This is Isha Oberoi from Leora.ai, and you're listening to the Leora Workplace Wellbeing Podcast, the channel that provides you micro learnings for creating a great place to work, whether you're working on yourself, your team, or your business. Today, we're talking with Ben Ross, CEO and co-founder of Propel Ventures, who knows exactly what it takes to create a great place to work. Welcome, Ben. How are you today?
Thanks, Isha. Good. Very good. Thank you.
Let's start a little bit just for our listeners that might not be familiar with Propel and also yourself. How did you fall into this business and what made you start Propel?
So I was involved with product management as a head of product at a big business, and I always thought, we've come up with this great product strategy. I'd love to actually be on the hook to deliver it. And there was always another side of the business that was on the delivery side. So one day I thought I'll go out on my own and I'll do both the product management and I'll do the delivery of it as well. And so now we do that for a whole lot of other companies, and we really enjoy it and we like that full end-to-end accountability. So that's what the business does.
And so you started this business from the beginning. Did you think was there a strategy around becoming a great place to work, or did this just happen organically because of the leadership style or the leadership, learnings that you were experiencing and then bringing into the business? Was it intentional or?
So Isha, I think that when you're really small, you've got no excuse not to be a great place to work because you're the founder and there's not many other people there and you're in it together. And I think that the challenge is more about what choices you make as you grow to try and retain be a great place to work. There's actually a whole lot of forces that naturally are probably pushing you like in two directions. Like one is just to be average at what you do, and the other is to become a more bureaucratic, impersonal, sort of worse place to work. So I think as your business grows, there's two forces. You need to forcibly stay different, and that requires real active steps different in the market, and then forcibly try to sort of be a great place to work, and also not be sucked into a lot of the fads that people suggest are the shortcuts to be a great place to work that we've seen a lot of, and now that's coming unwound, like the beanbags and the free food and all this sort of stuff. Like I think it's much more fundamental and deep than that.
Yes. So the biggest fear that I've learned from speaking to business leaders or heads of people and culture is that having a strategy towards great place to work or best place to work is distracting for the core mission or the resourcing that needs to go to the core mission of delivery of service or product for their business. Has that been your experience, or have you found that it's actually helped?
Definitely mutual. Oh no, definitely mutually reinforcing. I think that there's what's a distraction from being a great business is you can take shortcuts, which I would call like culture debt, possibly is a term. I don't know if that's a real thing. That actually detract from your being a great place to work, but possibly give you more short-term revenue or profit. And so they're the things. Like in our business, for example, I might have a client that says, I want someone from your team just for like 2 months. And so that's not great for my business, although there's a little bit of revenue, but it's also like could be quite bad for the employee because they're away from everybody else and they don't know really what they're getting, and maybe they're not close to their manager anymore. And so you're really forced with a lot of decisions where you say, well, I kind of need to take on that cultural debt at the moment because we need the income, but I do know that it's going to lead it to a worse experience for my employees. So I think that as you grow in a business, you do have to take on some cultural debt just to stay alive. But at what point do you start to really just say, no, that's really being too detrimental to us? I think that that's the real challenge. I think as a good leader, you always know what the right answer is from a cultural perspective, but you need to make the trade-off.
Yeah, that makes sense. And maybe keeping that as almost like almost like a percentage value that, okay, we might carry this much cultural debt. Yes. And have some decisions that we know might impact our long-term strategy towards, the values that you're creating towards a great place, a great organization?
Yeah, so we've been quite upfront about that, Isha. So our staff members actually in particular, they let us know, we know when we're taking on, I've made up this term cultural debt, but you know what I'm talking about. But our team members will say, that's not in line with our values, or and they'll let us know. And our formula for dealing with that often is to be very transparent and say, for these reasons, this is why we might need to do it at this point. But that doesn't get you off the hook. It really just more gives people more context. But at some point, you need to really come back and say, no, that's not who we are. Or maybe that is who we are. So I'm just being really clear with you that we have changed. And if you want to get off the bus now, that's okay for everybody. But we've had a few of those situations where we have actually had to almost just change. For us, just to be really real about it, we initially started by saying, you come to Propel because we guarantee you a good manager and you're going to work for your manager, and everyone deserves a good manager. And so we train our managers really well. We put them through this sort of boot camp. And then we did have clients say to us, oh, we'd like that team to work in our organization, but they'll be reporting to some manager. It was at a bank, for example, at this point. And the revenue was so attractive that we said, let's give this a try. And of the 7 people in that team, we lost 4 of them within the first 3 months. And so we had to actually back out of that deal and not serve that client anymore. And it was a bad story for everybody. And we've learned from that now. So we tried it, didn't work.
Wow, that's quite a solid experience, isn't it? An example. So I'm gonna ask you, what is this program? What is the boot camp? Is it internally driven and internally curated, or you outsourcing part of the program that the managers go through?
No, it's all internal. So there's about 10 books that really have been formative for us as the executives at Propel, and you could call it a book club, but it ends up being more than a book club because actually the team members don't often read the books. but so we end up running every fortnight, one of the executives, and we rotate it, more or less runs a session that are on the key thoughts and themes from a particular leader. So whether it's Patrick Lencioni or who are the other folks Daniel Pink or Daniel Kahneman or that. So we just pick, we've got these people that have got really foundational ideas about how to be a great manager. And we run sessions on that. So that our team and our managers end up having a bit of a kit bag of the best of in terms of people leadership and people management and corporate leadership by virtue of being at Propel. And then the idea is that over time, then they should be able to start taking those courses and it becomes teach trainer sort of situation.
Interesting. That's incredible. And with the values, you mentioned that you've got some core values and they also drive quite a bit of the decision making in the business. How did you come up with those values? Was that co-created with the leadership as well, the board of leaders?
Yeah, so the companies that I've worked for before Propel had very strong values-driven culture, and it really lined up absolutely everything that we did. So probably the most powerful value I ever had was a company called Intuit, and one of their values was integrity without compromise. And I still remember it just came into being. There were so many times. So when you called up a competitor, for example, to do a mystery shop, do you use your Gmail address or do you use your actual company address? Small things like this where it actually permeated the biggest decisions all the way to the smallest. And so I've seen the power of great values. And so when we started Propel, we went through a process where we ran the business for a little while. We didn't have any values, and then we brought the team members together and said, what makes us different? And we actually ran an exercise, a workshop, and that helped us distill our values. And we've actually got a really interesting sort of balance in our values where a couple of the values actually push you in one direction, and then a couple of values actually push you in the other direction. So there's a forced level of compromise where they don't all neatly fit. And then we've got this other value that is forthright, that sits in the middle of those, that says, we know that these values are going to come at loggerheads, so have that conversation and in a forthright way to resolve that not inconsistency, but level of incompatibility at some point.
That's really interesting. I've seen that also in Amazon's values, and it talks about, extreme customer centricity, but at the same time, resourcefulness. So you're almost, in your decision making, that's just one example of the values, is you've got to go above and beyond and give the customer the most unique experience possible, but you do it in the most resourceful way, and use the least amount of effort or resourcing or investment. So it's quite interesting how I can imagine that working really well, because you almost do need that tension in your decision making, and to look at all sort of the whole spectrum of which way it could lead to come to a balanced approach.
Yeah, so that example that you gave is very similar to our values. We've got one with client centricity, another one founders mindset. So one's about like doing as much for the client as you can. We've got another one that's about craftsmanship, which is spending as much time as the right amount of time to deliver a great product. But then we've got another one that's founders mindset, which is about getting it out there. So they deliberately conflict, and so you need something to be that circuit breaker, because you can't do both.
And what's wonderful about the nature of these values is that it forces everyone in your business, in your teams, to actually think about each thing uniquely, versus just going, yep, okay, I'm going to take this approach, but maybe that approach in that context is not right. So it's almost like deliberately being very present around, how will this impact, how does this value impact this decision that I'm about to make? It's really interesting.
It also really empowers the team members to speak with their managers when their managers are making decisions, to say, oh, I don't think that's a founder's mindset. So, for example, we don't have any expense policy, like related to expenses of lunches or whatever else, because we've got a value that's founder's mindset. And that just means that if you were the founder of this business, what would you approve of spending the money on that thing? So we find that our values can really help us cover a lot of ground that we now just don't need to do those sort of policies.
Yeah, I think when I think about values, because it's been such a central part of our internal cultural strategy as well for the businesses, is it really starts to guide everyone and give clarity across the whole organization, especially when you have businesses, and most businesses are like this. There's a heap of cross dependency. So when you're trying to deliver an outcome, you've got multiple teams that are working together, and to get that alignment of mindset and alignment right off the bat, it's so much easier to then project manage, right, through to what you're trying to achieve. So the other thing I was going to ask you was, what other things outside of values have you introduced, and what are the other cornerstones of Great Place to Work?
So one of the big parts that we've built in alongside our value of forthright is having a culture of giving people feedback, and in a really thoughtful way. So there's a book called Radical Candor that's all about giving feedback, and probably the heart of that book is all about making sure that the person that you're giving feedback to believes and understands that the reason why you're giving feedback is that you've got good intent for them. So you've built up a level of trust. And so, you could actually give the same feedback to two people, but if one of them really understands that it's coming from a good place and the other one doesn't, it'll have two completely different impacts. And so that feedback culture really starts from the top and comes back to me. So, I'm often asking for feedback from my team members when I'm working alongside them. And one of the reasons why I quite like having our team members work from the office is it's actually a lot easier for me to come off a call or come out of a meeting and be able to give them feedback right then and there. And I find that that's become a very important and distinctive part of our culture that's led to people being able to accelerate their development rapidly. It's actually astonishing for me. The folks that are able to accept feedback the most are the ones that have been able to accelerate the fastest, because they just get more feedback because they're so receptive of it.
Yeah, I heard recently a clinical psychologist talk about the fact that in Australia, they specialize in businesses and workplaces, that we really have a culture where we don't feel comfortable giving feedback. Is the book you mentioned called Radical Candor? Is that what you said?
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good book. And there's another one that's similar. It's called Fierce Conversations. Have you heard of that one?
Right.
Fierce
I have
Conversations.
not heard of that one.
Yeah, so really good books, talking like how to frame feedback, how to ensure, like you said, having that trust and rapport leading up to giving of that feedback, and really putting in that emphasis on the intention behind it. And it takes a lot. I think it takes a lot of courage, but culturally, if that's one thing that can be cracked into workplaces, it would create a huge sort of progress across all levels. Because yeah, you're absolutely right. People that are more receptive are going to grow, and obviously, yeah, grow heaps faster in an organization.
So the sister to that one has been sort of the level of communication and transparency that we give to our team members about all sorts of things, like, and so we not only have like an Ask the Exec channel that's like, you can post things with your name or anonymously, and we found that at times where it's almost like a good barometer for how transparent you're being, because when you feel like you're being transparent but you're not being transparent enough, there'll be a couple of questions that are anonymously posted on the Ask the Exec channel, and you realise, oh, like people are wanting more, and so yeah, it's been interesting for us because over time, how much that channel is being used or not, but it's been a challenge for me personally, because it have been times where I've been almost too transparent about what's happening in the business, and as an employee, that can be either scary or confronting, or even small things like if an employee who's a key employee is very popular and leaves all of a sudden and you let them go. There's obviously like lots of history and reasons for doing that, but there's also privacy, and so we've had situations where we just can't be that transparent. But our team members are used to us being super transparent about something, and then all of a sudden we're not transparent, and so we've found that, and again, like this is a post-COVID thing, that I think that during COVID, that like whilst we were trying to be transparent, there's lots of fidelity that was missed when we're not face to face and not together, and so building up a different type of transparency and level of communication and finding the right balance. Again, it feels like we've had to reinvent that again.
Yeah, and part of that reinvention, are they things that you've introduced to continue high levels of communication and transparency with hybrid working?
So with hybrid working, we just stepped up the amount of, we had like a cadence of like almost deep dive town halls and then small little like mini company updates. And so we've had to juggle like what the right frequency of having those is and what they look like. And so now on Wednesdays, everybody comes to the office and we have those as a face-to-face. Every second Wednesday, we'll have a deep dive. There's a couple of little things that I do. For example, like I'll always wait for a question, like no matter like that, and then people have started to know that no matter what happens, like this meeting's not finished until there's a question. And there's a couple of people in the audience that are now like they'll ask the question and they'll either ask or they'll say asking for a friend, and whether they are actually asking for a staff member or asking for themselves, like it doesn't matter. Like they can see that I'm actually very grateful to have the question, because I'd rather it actually gets raised rather than I see it on an Ask the Exec 10 minutes after I finish the meeting. And so I think that as the team becomes more familiar with sort of our new way of operating, like all of these kind of, it's about building up that trust over a long period of time. And I think, Esha, one of the things that we've tried to do is try and hack the speed at which or the duration it takes for people to build trust. And there's a few of those hacks, like having people like eat together or do activities that are not work together, so they get to know each other, has always been one of them. So we give our team members like a budget. I don't know what it is, but it's enough to have lunches and dinners together whenever they want and social events, and they manage that themselves. And so we find that that's probably the easiest thing you can do. But if anyone ever has suggestions for other things that have been able to reduce that duration to build trust quickly, I think that's probably a very high impact thing that you can do for your business.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that. So then a lot of things that you've mentioned are quite unique to your business. And if you want to accelerate, ramp up, you know, the sincerity and the trust, the intimacy between the peers and the people, do you have like strategies around onboarding that are very specific as well? So when someone comes into the business, they get familiarized from day one as to how unique your sort of behaviors and cultures are within the business?
So we have the normal onboarding, like we've got an app and a program that people go through that sort of teaches them all the Propel-isms and everything else. I think that probably the thing that helps them more than that is that the managers are really familiar with this thing called the Tuckman 4 stages of forming, norming, performing, you know, and so they sort of try and manage that process of moving through the 4 phases in a pretty deliberate and obvious fashion. So when the first arguments start to happen, they're like, this is good. This means we're at the next phase. Like, okay, we're at the storming. We haven't worked it all out. Like, it's normal to disagree. And so having that framework there, the Tuckman 4 phases, has been, and educating our team members that this is the thing, like, helps us get through it faster. But I don't have a magic bullet to, so people do understand. So probably the other thing, Isha, is we try and make sure that there's a certain number of Propel people that have the Propel values, and we all, often, whenever we start growing, and I was just mentioning to you before, we've started to grow again as a business, like, I think our staff members don't realise how valuable they are in that growth phase, because the people that are there that have the Propel values, like, quite quickly you want to put sort of 1 or 2 of them in each team, but you run out of them, like, very quickly, those cultural ambassadors, and it's a massive constraint to growth. So, I mean, I can hire 20 people tomorrow, but like, they will ruin my relationship with my clients. That's 20 people off the street. I need to seed them with Propel people, and I don't have that many seeds. So it's a very, and then those seeds, I need to actually also explain to them in detail, like, what their role is as a seed, and to be very deliberate about explaining the Propel way of doing things. And so there's a real limiter on how quickly you can grow in a sustainable way without like completely losing it. And so, it feels a bit weird, Isha, because we actually haven't grown over the last couple of years because it's been quite difficult conditions. But as we start to grow now, I'm now remembering what it was like for the first few years when we had rapid growth in the business.
No, I can appreciate that. I know that when we had strong periods of growth, some of the things that were quite valuable in part of that onboarding was we had the 7-day check-in, where the managers would deliberately, they had a form. I know the form in itself sounds a bit ridiculous, having another process in place, but just gives a structure to the conversation, like, how the last week been, what do you understand about our values, and bringing all of those things to light for that individual, to just highlight the importance of the culture and the importance of the values and the mission vision. So things like that. I know within the first month, we would ask questions like, how have you found the connection with your immediate manager? What are some things that your manager can do to make you feel more within the work, more integrated within the workplace? What else do you need to succeed within the next 3 months? So just also the point of that exercise was to also bring that person into the equation. So it's not kind of one way and one directed. It's not just linearly directed by the business, but it's like, hey, are there things that we haven't thought of that you think would mean you would be successful in your integration? What are things that you want? So, and it was really fascinating to also read back at these things and go, okay, well, everyone's actually quite unique, and some people want more of this and more of that. And so the managers and the leaders can quickly respond to that within the first 3 months, and make sure that we as a business have done everything we can to integrate that person. And then ultimately, it's always a bit of a, within the first 6 months, you kind of see how people fit in eventually. What else?
Yeah, that's really valuable. So the other thing that we do is each week a survey goes out to each person, which asks them 4 or 5 questions, and then they're automatically charted. So it ends up being like an early indicator of whether like the team is starting to trend down for one reason or another. They're not happy about something, and so it's anonymized. So you just get sort of the team score rather than individual scores.
Yeah, like almost a regular sentiment check, so you can be more proactive as a business and respond.
Yeah.
I find those really useful. You send out the surveys, and then again, the next 12 months, you can build some initiatives and strategies proactively based on the sentiments that are within the business. So they're very useful.
Yeah, I think that the second part of what you described, I think, is super valuable, and that's what people miss, and that is that like we're lucky to have a COO in our business who is very process oriented, and he would take the analysis of what people are telling us, put the program in place, report it back to the team members and say, you've told us this, as a result of putting this program in place, here's how we'll know if we're successful, and then let's have a look how we're tracking at the next engagement survey. And so there was that whole routine, and people understood that level of predictability around, okay, they got, like, if I mark this, then they're going to listen and they're going to put something in place. And so it's a routine that's now built into the structure of the business now.
I think what you just said is so valuable. It's the actual response to this information, right? That I think that again builds that trust within the teams to say, well, actually, if I do voice this, we know that something's going to happen. There's going to be an outcome, and then that further builds that trust and that confidence to speak up each time and actually ask for things.
I have had a challenge with that recently, Isha. Like, it was very interesting because our team members got into this pattern where they would give us feedback and we would respond to it. And they were often things that they wanted done, and it was obvious. When it came to responding, but when we didn't agree with what they were suggesting, so for example, when we asked our team members to come back to the office, but they didn't really want to, there was the interpretation that we hadn't listened to them. And I found that quite challenging because like we had listened, but like we had a different view. And so that's probably, I hadn't had that experience before, because often there was a case of you'd listen and you'd realize something that was like a blind spot, and then you just act on it because it's obvious. But there is a whole nother skill in listening, saying, for these reasons, we don't agree, and this is what we're going to do. And so that was a whole new pattern for me that is just a recent thing, which like I think we were quite clunky in terms of implementing it because we hadn't had that situation before.
And is it better now though, than now that you're aware of it? Was there something that you did to clean that up, that communication?
Yeah, I think it just took a lot of, I think that the communication, we had to be a bit clearer about the reasons why we disagreed with the staff, and what the implications were. And I think that probably comes to like a big point, which is, I think that as a leader, one of the things that makes us a great place to work is that we realize that as a leader, all of a sudden you've got a lot more context into the business, and that extra information makes your situation, everything just makes sense, and so your job is generally to give as much context as you can and hand it off. Like, by having context, you've got an obligation and a responsibility to just keep on giving just pushing out the context that's in your head. And so we work with quite a few companies that are founder-led, where the founder has the most context, they're the most important person, and they quite like holding that position. And that information asymmetry by having the context is, it can be a bit of an ego trip. And so we've been teaching our leaders just to hand off as much context as you can to the team, and that it may make you less valuable, it makes the team members more valuable, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. Yeah,
no, that absolutely makes sense. Just as we bring this discussion to a close, one final thing I wanted to touch on is part of having a great place to work is people feeling like they're contributing to a purpose, to like something that's bigger than themselves. And we know that this is becoming more and more important than a paycheck. So purpose over paycheck. How is that translated for you as a business? How do you translate, the work that you do and the impact that you're making for your people? And is that very clear in the business?
Yeah, so our vision is all about helping products succeed and achieving product success. And when you don't have product success, there's like a lot of wasted time and effort and money. Like people will work on something for a long period of time and then it fails. And so we find that our leaders are really, the best leaders are able to explain how what they're doing in their small corner achieves that like vision of reducing waste and achieving product success. And so, Isha, something I found is that some of our least sexy projects have had the highest engagement score because the leader of that team has been able to explain most clearly how what they're doing is helping to achieve product success and linking back to our vision. And the sexiest work that we've done for the sexiest clients, they've felt, well, this is really sexy. I don't really need to do that heavy lifting and explain. And the team, after the first week, they forget about the sexiness of the client, and they're looking for something more meaningful. And so we completely agree. I've been trying to work out why is it that there's been this drive to more purpose over almost like profit and paycheck. I've got some theories personally myself, which I haven't validated, but I have found, like, I grew up in an era where it was all about working hard and getting a paycheck and trying to save up and buy a house and all this sort of stuff. And I think that people's values have really changed a lot. And I'm still trying to understand that a lot myself. I think it's a very positive move forward where people are pushing for purpose. I'm actually still surprised by how much our team members are yearning for that. And yeah, it's a good trend.
It's an interesting, it's almost like the Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? And so human consciousness, as we've evolved with each generation, it's the level of consciousness that's evolved. And that's all it is. I think it's like, well, all our basic needs are met. And we seemingly, the majority of us have a good quality of life. So if we've achieved those basic needs and of prosperity and abundance, then how do we give back? And so I think that's where the mind shift of the generational shifts are coming in. And they're very obvious. They're very obvious with the newer generations coming into the workplaces. Yeah. But I want to thank you for sharing your insights today of the things that you've done in your business. Are there any last 2 to 3 books that are just must-haves that we should be reading, that you've read and thoroughly enjoyed around culture and workplace?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a big fan of a guy called Patrick Lencioni, and he's written a couple of books, one of which is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and the other one is called The Advantage. Both of those books, here's a guy who says everyone deserves a great manager, and he's made it his life's work to help people be great managers. And so I thoroughly recommend either reading the book or even going onto YouTube and watching him, because like many of these really well-established thought leaders coming out of the US that have lectured a lot, their presentations are very, their stories are really compelling, and the way that they package up their message is very edible and compelling and powerful for you to take home. So I'd be happy to sort of recommend that one. So The 5 Dysfunctions of the Team, Patrick Lencioni, Lencioni.
Thank you. And you also mentioned Dan Pink on motivation. He's done some good work around that space.
Yeah. So like we talk to our team members a lot about like mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And so Dan Pink talks a lot about those things, and that's what we try and help our team members achieve through their work. And so when you think about it, there's a lot of scope for mastery, autonomy, and purpose in businesses that are creative businesses, like software development businesses. So we pretty quickly see where people don't have control over their own domain and they feel disempowered, and so we're commonly talking about that as well. Yeah, that's a good reminder.
So Ben, I think we're going through some major shifts again with technological transformations, the rise of AI in workplaces, and the continuation of the hybrid remote working phenomena. So I hope to have you back on in a couple of years to see how you've managed those shifts and transitions within the